Well, good morning. Thank you for joining me today here, and as you saw in the title, I want to talk about George Washington, politics, and rivers. So I'm going to start with, oh, you can't see, this is my Texas mug. I got this mug when I don't know if the music restarted or what, but that looked very just like there was too much music down there. So hopefully you were able to hear me just fine. Anyway, I'm here in Colorado, but I have my Texas mug with some coffee in it. I made a latte out of some Colorado coffee, some Boyer's Rocky Mountain Thunder. And I chose this on purpose because my topic today was to talk about George Washington, politics, and rivers. And for myself, my politics situation, my experience in politics happened in Texas. And so this mug, I was going to tell you the full story, and the problem is I'm having a real mental block right now. Somebody gave this to me, a family member at Christmas or a birthday. Somebody gave this to me from Texas, and I can't remember who it is. So if you are listening and you know that you gave it to me, you need to let me know so that I know that you gave me the mug. So this is talking about George Washington, politics, and rivers. I'll tie them all together for you here in a minute. But we're at a time of election again, and so seems just constantly happening where we have the elections coming through, and you have ballots to consider, and who are you going to vote for, and why are you going to vote for the person you're going to vote to, and are you willing to talk to other people about it, or are you just secretly kind of shamefully hiding what you're doing? What so much of politics, it's an interesting thing. And so I was reading over the weekend, and I just came across again George Washington and how for 8 years he had served as the general for the United States Army back in the 1770s and 80s, and then here he comes into this time where he's ready to retire from the public eye. And as he's headed back up to the Congress to talk with them and to turn in his commission, he stops for a moment and does all of his paperwork. We still have his, I don't have it. Somewhere there's still a record of his expenditures that he had kept very carefully. And there was about 15,000 pounds, sterling pounds, that he had spent of his own money during the time that he was a general of the United States Army, the military. And as he was the general and was using his own money, this was money he did not ask to be reimbursed for. He kept track of it, but he freely gave that. He believed in the cause. He was a leader. And so he turns in his, oh, by the way, 15,000 sterling pounds from back then turns into close to $3 million of today's money. And so you think of someone giving their time for 8 years, giving $3 million, all of that. It's an interesting thought to think that here is someone who had every right to demand more, but he didn't. And he just wanted to live a quiet life. And he went back to his land and his farms and his properties and was writing, and eventually was called back up again and had to serve another time as President of the United States of America. And when I think about politics, I can't help but consider all the politicians that I know today, all the ones, and I don't know that many politicians, but all the ones that I know of, the ones I hear speaking in public forums that I see sound bites of online and things like that. And I just wonder, like, how many of them are willing to serve for 8 years for the good of their country and are willing to pay their own way and someone else's way and other people's way. And it's a phenomenal thought to think of the shift that has happened. So what I wanted to do today, just to bring a little bit of thoughtfulness to the topic, is I have right over here my other camera set up on a notepad. And so I want to just sketch out a little thought that I had about how some of this works. And so I'm going to start, as I mentioned, I'm going to start with a river. I might have to go with a bigger river here. That's a very small line, so let me try the other end of that marker. So I have a river that's flowing And in a river that's flowing, if you're like me, you grew up in the country or some, outdoors. And conventional wisdom talks about if you want to get a drink from this river, be very careful that you know what's upstream. And if there's something upstream, for instance, when I was growing up, I was very aware that some of my uncles and others had farms that had pigsties upstream. And so you didn't want to drink water downstream from the pig pen. So you always wanted to try to get upstream. And so in the hills of Tennessee, sometimes that was almost impossible, and you had to go and find perhaps a spring that was fresh just right where it comes out of the rock, and then you knew that you were as far upstream as you could be. And so that's one of the things is you want to be you. So that's a conventional wisdom, just talking about rivers, right? But in thinking about politics, one of the thoughts that I've had is culture or society, and this is the thought that I mentioned a moment ago, and I don't know if the audio was still on at the time or not. I don't know where all this idea came from, but somewhere along the line, I was given the concept that um, if culture is that there's different things that feed into culture, and there's different pieces of it. And so, for instance, one way that I heard it said was, we look at the influence and impact that politics has on our society. And somebody said, yes, but entertainment is upstream from politics. And you could say, and I've heard other things, you could say education is upstream from politics. So let's look back at my map here and I'll see if I can clarify any of that at all. So if you are a person, and this is the river, then you are drinking from this river somewhere along the line. And so if you could be really clever, you could figure out how to always spend all of your time up here at the very top of the river and only drink water from here. But the reality is, most of us, sooner or later, we end up somewhere downstream and we are drinking water from here. And so what is upstream from us? Well, if you think of downstream, like down here, if you say this area right here, that this is just a general society that we live in, and so this is the normal. This is where just about everything is happening, is down here in society. And you say, well, what's impacting society? Well, they said, and again, I'm quoting. I wish I could remember more of where I learned. It's been so many years. I've been thinking these thoughts for well over a decade now, and so I know that people have poured into me in this, and I just don't have a specific quote or a specific source for some of this. But for instance, back, if you think of an early time in any society, when you first start producing art, the art is trying to copy the society. So for instance, I've been out in Utah. I posted some pictures last week where I've seen some of the sketches on the side of the cliffs, and you see, what are the sketches of? Well, you see animals with antlers and stuff. You see hunters. You see art that seems to represent something that was happening in life. Well, and that's the way we start. We start out with art where it is copying our life, and art aspires to be like life. So if you think of art as not just being drawing, but being music, painting and all those arts, if you think of it as being drama, theater, film, movies, all of that, you can see where this is true, where we might start out making stories or telling stories that give telling the stories that are like real life. And so we watch them and we're like, yep, that's like my life. But at some point, there's a switch that happens where we're no longer talking, where art isn't just copying life, but now life, society, culture is trying to copy the art. So we start out with art copying life, and then it switches to where life copies art. And so now you have film stars who can say things in their movies that really is very unrealistic, that wouldn't ever actually happen in your daily life, but you start dreaming, what if it was like that? What if it was like that?
and you start using the language they use, you start using the poses that they use, you start using the way they speak, and you start copying art. So now art is not just copying you anymore, but you are now copying art. So if you think about that in the picture, in the image of the river, for a while, um, perhaps art was down here. And so there is some art and it's looking at society and it's copying that. But now art is upstream and it is feeding into society and actually impacting how society operates. And so suddenly, art is not just copying life. It still does some of it, but it also is impacting society and the way we live. So if that makes sense. All right, so then I have this other thought that I've had before. Where does politics fit into this? So if we think of politics as being upstream, if we say, well, politics is somewhere up here in this area, then we're like, wow, politics is impacting my art, it's impacting society, it's impacting all of that. And it's true that there are times when politics is up here. But for the most part, what I've discovered is that politics actually spends a lot of time down here on this side of things. And so if politics is over here, I'm just now realizing that my camera seems to have switched to a funny view on this. It's no longer the same view on the GoPro that I had when I first started out. But if politics, for the most part, this is what I've found. Politics is over here, and it is the complete result of society. Society gets the kind of politics that it wants. Society gets leaders that it wants. Society chooses to be ruled in the way that they're most comfortable with. And so if that's the case, well, then politics comes along and instead of impacting and changing, it is actually just going along with whatever's happening. And so we don't want to just go with the flow. We want to actually, if you've ever heard this before, if you've ever heard someone say, well, don't just go with the flow, you need to change. You want to not just go with the flow, you want to actually impact it. Like my father-in-law or I don't know if it was my Stacy's dad or her mom or both of them, but they would say something along the line of, you don't just watch the news, make the news. So you get to decide and choose how you want to impact, how you want to respond to people. Okay, so I want to continue sketching this in just a second. I'm going to replace this battery while we're talking here and get this setting back on where it's supposed to be. But if you think about George Washington and you say, well, was he being influenced by his politics or was he influencing not just the politics but also the culture of the day? And I think it's easy enough for us to say, well, he was making a difference. People were copying him. And so at the time, there was a season when after he had won the Revolutionary War, where he was back home, and he was having so much problems because it seemed like every painter or every artist was coming out and wanting to paint George Washington. So sometimes he was sitting for multiple artists at the same time, so they could all paint him and paint his image. And so they were all copying him, so to speak. And so that's the question, though, that I have for us is, are we impacting the culture or is culture impacting us? And one of the ways. Okay, so let me see if I can get this back on the right setting here. There we go. And then I need to get it back on. And then I'm going to show you a little bit more of my river here. All right, so if you think, and this is the whole point that I'm trying to get after here, is if you're sitting there and you're thinking, man, the politicians in our country are ruining us, then you can get very mad at the politicians, and what you're doing effectively is you're living downstream from politics, and you're drowning down here, and you're constantly wishing that someone would come along and rescue you, because there now I think you can just barely see that. But if you're down here in this very and you're just always looking for someone to come rescue you, you're living downstream of politics. What you have to realize is that politics is the result of what happens in society. And so if you don't like the way the politics are happening, you need to change society. And if you want to change society, you need to get upstream from it. So maybe art. And so for one of the reasons when back in the days when I was working with the Lavaca County Republican Party, I absolutely loved the things I learned about my nation, about the country, about the people. I loved everything. I learned a lot about myself. And so my time in Texas politics was really good. I really enjoyed the time. I learned a lot, met some really good people. And in the process, I found out something. And the thing that I discovered is a discovery that we all need to make sooner or later. And it is that I can choose as an individual where in the river I'm drinking from. And it takes a little bit of work, but I can step out of the river and I can look upstream, downstream, and say, wait a minute, why am I drinking everything that they're pouring down this way? It's impacting my life. It's messing me up. I don't like this. And you head on upstream to get some cleaner water. So one of the things that I am doing is not only am I going upstream to try to get cleaner water, I've now started trying to go upstream and doing something that would impact society. So I want to be up here. So the reason I make movies, the reason is up here. I want to impact society. Now, there's other things. For instance, you can say that in the church, like for church and discipleship, I'll just go ahead and let's see. Do I have a? I'll just have to draw a blue church because I don't have the other marker here. So here's a little church. It's got a steeple on it. It's a tiny little church. But this little bitty church right here, this church can impact what's happening, and it can start flowing, making disciples, and it can impact art, it can impact society, it can then impact politics. And so what you'll notice happening is a lot of times people look in the water down here and they say, wow, the water down here is so dirty. It's so bad. We've got bad politics, bad water. This is not good. And so they start dumping all kinds of stuff. They're trying to jump in here and get the dirty water out, and they're working so hard to try to clean up politics. And if they really want to make a difference, they need to step back and say, wow, politics can be very dirty. And then they walk upriver and they look up at society and say, wow, society itself is pretty dirty. And so then they walk up the river a little farther and they look at the art, maybe the movies and the theaters and everything. They see that and say, wow, this is pretty contaminated. We've got a problem right here. So you got to keep walking upstream, and eventually you come to the church and you say, well, is the church actually impacting the culture, or has the church, for whatever reason, abandoned their spot up here and come downriver and is all the way over here and is a drowning church trying to be in the politics of everything, and is, instead of actually making disciples, they're now being impacted by every little thing that anyone says, and they can only read the Bible if the politics says they can, and they're only being see, we have to be very careful where we plant ourselves. Let me just come back over here. So we need to be very, very aware of where we are on the scheme of things. Are we drinking downriver contaminated water and feeling like victims, or are we choosing to walk upriver and say, I want to make a difference in the clean water for me, for my family, for my community? And then it goes to your church, your fellowship, it goes on out, it keeps going into your nation, and eventually politics changes. And so, yes, you should vote. Yes, you should be involved. Yes, you should know all of that. But you should also be aware that there's a lot of things. For instance, over here on this side, it's not just art in the church. There's also education. And I don't know how to draw a school building but I'm just going to write education up here. There's a very, very intriguing study that if you look back 100 years ago, there was a lot of change happening in the world as we were developing more and more technology and more awareness of what was going on around the world. There was a lot of change happening, and a lot of people thought, wow, now that we have this much enlightenment, let's change everything and make every community be an amazing. And so socialism was introduced, and a lot of other things were brought in, thinking that this would change the world. And so as a result, America, we ended up fighting several world wars, and lots of people died because of the ideas that were being espoused and what was the results of those ideas. And so at the time, America thought, wow, we soundly refuted and rejected communism and socialism and Marxism. We got rid of all those. We said no to all of those. However, what's really intriguing is if you go back and look and see what was happening in higher education at that time. In our schools in America, if you look at all the Ivy League schools, you go back and see when they were founded. Many of them, if you'll go look on their buildings, you'll see Bible verses and even mission statements and things, and you realize, wow, at one point the education system in America was designed to help people be able to know the Lord, to read Scripture. And something happened, something shifted. And what's really, really intriguing, with a little bit of digging, you'll find that there were some particular people, some very specific people who said, you know what, we cannot beat them through war. However, we can beat them by ideologies. And if you look at some of the people that were very vocal for ideas and thoughts that were anti-American, they showed up some years later teaching in our universities. And then you keep going, you realize, wow, so many of them that had these worldviews that were so contrary to everything that we thought we stood for, and yet now they're here and they're teaching in our universities. And so that was an instance in which they looked at everything here and said, well, we've tried right here at politics. We've tried here, and we did a direct affront on society and politics. They fought us off. They hated the idea. They didn't want to do that. So they went upstream and said, well, what's upstream? Education. Another place they went to look for was they went upstream, they went up to art, and they said, well, what can we do with art? And so they went upstream, got into the world of art, got into the world of education, and within 25 years from the time that we defeated their ideas on the battlefield, they had infiltrated our schools and all of those places. Now, at this point, when I tell you something like that, you have a choice. You can either say, oh, woe is me, look at this dirty water that just keeps pouring down over me all the time. And you can fuss about it and fuss about it, and you can blame politics, you can blame all the other people, and it doesn't do a lick of good. What you need to do is say, okay, right here where I am, the water keeps being dirty. What can I do about it? And at that point, you step out of the river, you look north, you look south, you see what's going on, and you say, well, is there a spot for me to go upstream? And you go upstream a ways, and you say, up here, the water is better. So rather than just taking everything that the arts and media, everything that the educational world, everything that politics, everything that society is pouring at you, go upstream. And as you can imagine, being a pastor, my personal belief is that if you go all the way upstream, all the way to the source, you will find that in the beginning was God, and God created the heavens and the earth, and that God himself has thoughts, concepts, ideas, laws, precepts by which we can order our life. And if we can learn to live our life by his thoughts, by his precepts, it will change us, it will change our communities, our water will be cleaner. Um, Both, I think, literally and figuratively. If everybody in your community lived in a way that honored God, you would not have litter and trash on beside the road. That's a very literal problem that you have. Well, if people were fearing God and taking care of the earth the way he told us to, we wouldn't have the problem of litter. We wouldn't have the problem. A lot of the pollution could be taken care of. And it doesn't have to be anything about politics. It just has to be about people loving their God and saying, I want to start here at the beginning instead of go down there and just take everything that comes my way. If you don't like, and this is true, there's so many areas of your life where there's trash. And I say your life, I mean our life. Our life as a society. We're broken in. Remember, some time ago, I had the picture here of the worldview. And in the worldview, there is a certain amount of brokenness that happens, that is present anytime we are not bringing something to the cross. When we bring it to the cross, he is able to redeem it. He's able to transform it. But before the cross, and we spend, and this is the part now that gets tricky. On the worldview picture, if you see there, right where underneath the world, down there, you see those broken people lying there and they're hurting. Those people eventually can come to the cross. What we discover, though, is that you and I many times don't actually realize how much brokenness we are part of. And so we will bring some parts of our life to the cross and say, Lord, I need this redeemed. And then he redeems it, transforms it. We thank him for that. We're so grateful, not realizing that we should bring everything, all the brokenness, all the dirtiness, all the aching, bleeding pieces, and bring it all, and he can redeem all of it. Well, same thing with my picture of the river over here, is that if you look on the river, wow, and we keep going higher and higher. I'm not sure what's going on with my camera situation, but it keeps pulling itself farther and farther away from. Okay, so my river, here's the river. You might actually have some part of your life that you live right here, and you're just drinking whatever comes along. At the same time, you might have part of your life that you live up here, where you're very careful what you take in. What you're wanting is for your entire being, every part of your life, to be upstream and not to just be drinking the dregs. And for an example of this, some of you are very concerned what you eat. And so you be very careful. Well, I don't eat that kind of sugar. I don't do this kind of thing. And you're very, very careful what you consume, because you're aware that in the river of food, there's some bad stuff out there. So you've gone upriver in the food chain, and you say, I'm going to only do these things. And it's wise. You're only taking in and consuming the things that are good for you. However, another part of you, maybe your mind, you're filling with all kinds of movies or books or stories or entertainment, and you don't even care how dirty the river is. You just take it all. Maybe it's politics, where you're just taking it all and you're copying and pasting over and over again on your social media, and you're sharing all kinds of dirt and junk, and it's unclean, and you're just drinking from the bottom of the river, and you're being a victim. You're not understanding what's happening. Now, in politics, there's something that happens. If you choose to not just be impacted by the society and say, well, the people want me to do this. If you say, no, the right thing to do is this, that changes you from being a politician to being a statesman. And so that changes you. And so a statesman is also involved with government, but he is up here. He is upstream of society. And so you have options if you want to be involved in government. You can either be here upstream of society, saying, actually, God and logic and common sense and beauty all play into something that it would be better for us as a society if we did these things, and you will stand on principle and on purpose. Whereas a politician, purely a politician, just literally looks at the people and says, what do the people want, and can I give them what they want? The statesman is looking upstream, and he's saying, how does church and reason and logic and beauty from art, how does that all impact society? And what rules can we make, or what laws can we make that would help society better embrace beauty and truth and logic and reason? And how would that work best if we understood these things? And so a statesman will make rules or laws to make that happen. And so what you want to do is not just be a politician that is looking at what people are wanting, but that you are a statesman. You're looking upstream to see where's the water cleanest, and you're providing that to everyone that is downstream of you. And there's always somebody upstream of you, and there's always somebody downstream of you. You always have some influence, and you're always being influenced by someone. It's just part of life. It's fine. You, as a human being, will never be able to be all the way upstream. It's okay. God's all the way upstream. We don't worry about that part. We just want to focus on, am I completely, as much as possible, living upstream, or am I always living downstream and thinking I'm a victim? So that was my thought. Had to do with politics, rivers, all of that, and technological glitches and everything. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for letting me know when you couldn't hear me. And I will see you next week. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come into this today. So make sure you're living upstream in as many areas as possible.